My name is Mary Cavallero, and I'm a member of the reproductive justice team here at Unitarian Universalist Congregation at White Plains. We are thrilled to see so many people here for this important informational session. So thank you all for coming. Today we have two speakers, and then we will open the floor to questions at the end. Right? Our first speaker is State Senator Shelley Mayer. Our team first worked with Shelley. We've gotten to be on a first name basis back when after the Supreme Court Dobbs decision. Shelley was sponsoring legislation that authorized licensed New York providers to offer telemedicine in states where abortion was restricted. Our team worked to help to get that legislation passed. Last summer, I met Shelley at an event, and she told me that she was concerned about the passage of Proposition 1 or the Equal Rights Amendment. She asked if she could come and speak with us. So that's how this whole thing got started. Please welcome State Senator Shelley Mayer.
Thank you, Mary. I forgot I asked to come, but I'm glad I asked to come. Because between that time and now, this amendment has become more and more important, and the opposition has become more and more strident. And it's very important that those of us that strongly support it, including me who voted for it twice, and my colleagues who are here, talk about what it does, what it doesn't do, why it is so pressing. And I heard that during services today, the minister gave a rousing endorsement of Proposition 1. And I'm so grateful that that happened, because I do think we need voices from all sides to get people to understand what happened and why we're doing this. So I'm a state senator. I call myself Shelley, first name, no senator thing necessary. I represent the city of White Plains. I represent from Yonkers to Pound Ridge, the whole eastern side of Westchester, what I call the old George Latimer district, once redistricted. So it's not quite the same. But many people in this room, I suspect, if you're in White Plains or Scarsdale or Northeast Yonkers or Eastchester or anywhere on the Sound Shore, you are a constituent of mine. So after the Dobbs decision was leaked, first before it was leaked, before it came out, those of us in the Senate Democratic majority and the Assembly decided we had to do something. And we started right away passing laws to ensure that we protected as much as possible the right to abortion in New York State. But then Dobbs came out. And I should back up. In 2019, when we first became the majority, we passed the Reproductive Health Act, which put the right to abortion in the public health law. It used to be in the penal law. It used to be a part of the criminal law. We moved it. That was a big deal, and it didn't happen until 2019. Then Dobbs came out, and as Mary said, I sponsored a bill along with a lot of my colleagues. We did a lot of changes to ensure that the right to abortion in New York State was protected, protecting providers from malpractice suits, from disciplinary proceedings, all the things we thought could happen, and in fact have happened in other states. But the one thing that we did not do and we could not do is enshrine the right to abortion in the New York State Constitution. Why is that important? That's what's on the ballot here. Putting this right to abortion and reproductive health care in the Constitution as opposed to just the law. And why is that important? Because laws can be changed willy-nilly, as we've seen all over the country with some of these legislatures. They changed the law to fit the politics of the majorities in the House and the governor. Last time we had, I try not to talk too much partisan politics because Republicans voted for this amendment. I won't mention that. Last time we had the possibility of a sort of an anti-abortion person becoming governor. We got very close. If such a person becomes governor or the majority in either house, they can undo the Reproductive Health Act. They can undo any of the bills we passed. If it's in the Constitution, that is a much higher threshold, and they can't simply undo it. And we have seen what the consequences of state legislatures absolutely taking the law into their hands and denying or limiting the right to abortion. So here's what the Article 1, Section 11 of the Constitution now protects certain things. What it does protect is race, color, creed, or religion. That's all that it covers. This amendment, when you turn over your ballot and you vote yes, will add the following words: ethnicity, national origin, age, I hate to say for those of us over a certain age, this is quite important, disability or sex, including sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, pregnancy outcomes, and reproductive health care or autonomy. That's a lot of words, but what it really means is it protects the right to abortion, care after a miscarriage, IVF, all the things that are associated with reproductive care, defined broadly in the New York State Constitution. So it adds these things, and it will ensure that the right to abortion, as well as protection against discrimination based on disability and age, which are two big categories that are not currently in the Constitution. They exist in the law, but not in the Constitution, that we make this Constitution relevant to this moment and respond to the demands of this time. So just to explain the process, in order to change the Constitution, it's much harder than changing a law. To change the Constitution, two separate legislative terms have to vote for the amendment, and then it goes on the ballot. It's not signed by the governor. It is not, it's a different process. This passed the Senate and Assembly with both Democratic and Republican votes 2 times. Then some Republicans sued and said that the opinion of the Attorney General came too late. In a constitutional amendment, the Attorney General must weigh in. The court dismissed that lawsuit. So now this is on the ballot. And here's the challenge, and we're going to talk about it. There is a campaign of misinformation. It's pretty high and strong, and it is really a campaign of misinformation and distraction from this issue of abortion. Because if we don't enshrine abortion into the New York State Constitution right now, we're going to have to go back and do this all over again, and it will be multiple years before we get the chance to actually do what we must do right now. So this campaign of misinformation, which we're going to talk about a little, but for me, as someone who goes around and talks about this, this amendment, it is a real challenge, and I'm happy to answer questions about it. But let me be clear, this does not change any current law that exists about consent for medical procedures, about sports. These are really brought up by people who really don't want this abortion part in there. So they've come up with these other things that are appealing to people who really don't know very much. So they've come up with these other arguments, and these other arguments are starting to have salience, and I'm quite worried about it. So I think it's extremely important that people understand this does not change current law about consent for medical procedures, about who gets to play on a girls and boys sports team. Those of us who have been around a long time know that Title IX of the US law was a game changer for women. We didn't have women's sports in my day, and many of you of my age, we didn't have it. Now we have a robust women's sports. The last thing anyone would want was to limit that, and this has no impact on that whatsoever. So I just want to make that clear. The other thing I want to point out is once we pass this, we will be able to have much greater security that once there are challenges in the law, let's say a new legislature comes in or a new governor by executive order tries to change some of the things we did, we will have a constitutional basis to challenge it as opposed to just a basis in law. I would say we work closely with many stakeholders, including the Attorney General's office, the Civil Liberties Union, Planned Parenthood, many others, to make sure that this wording of this law is the right way. I would point out that the words on your ballot and the words in this amendment do not have the word abortion. And that is complicating for some people. And we're going to talk about why, because this concept of pregnancy outcomes is intended to be broad enough to include a range of things that we know happen during pregnancy. But when you turn it over, what it is going to say is this proposal would protect against unequal treatment based on ethnicity, national origin, age, disability, and sex, including sexual orientation, gender identity, and pregnancy. It also protects against unequal treatment based on reproductive health care and autonomy. So don't let anyone also raise the issue, well, this has nothing to do with abortion. This is all and much to do about abortion. And the third thing I want to point out is there is a very broad coalition of support for this. I printed out just to see if this church had formally endorsed it, which I'm going to raise with Mary because a number of Unitarian congregations have already done so. But the League of Women Voters, hardly the most partisan, it's a nonpartisan organization. The NAACP, which rarely endorses specific legislative things. There's a long list of over 100 groups across the country, and here in Westchester, many groups that have endorsed this. So the biggest challenge for me is getting people to understand you do have to turn the ballot over. And then there actually are 2 propositions in Westchester on the ballot. I'm not going to talk about the second one. That's a county one. But the first one is this one, a state constitutional amendment. We need people to vote yes, and we need enough people to vote yes to outweigh the very loud and misinformed group that is really trying to drum up a difficulty that is absolutely not anticipated, not contemplated, and will not happen under this amendment. So I'm going to stop and turn it over to my colleague from Planned Parenthood, if that's all right, Mary.
Just gonna say a little bit.
Okay, go ahead. Oh, yes, say sentences.
Okay. So Tyler Davis is a representative from Planned Parenthood. He works to create state-level policy change in the pursuit of sexual and reproductive freedom. He generously offered to speak with us today, so please give him a round.
A little bit. All right, are we able to hear me? I think it works. Great. All right, thank you. My name is Tyler Davis. I am the campaign specialist of advocacy and government relations at Planned Parenthood Hudson-Peconic, which is your local Planned Parenthood affiliate. We provide sexual and reproductive health care and advocacy in Westchester, Suffolk, Putnam, and Rockland counties. And we are also part of the coalition New Yorkers for Equal Rights, which has been for a few years now working to get proposal 1 to the ballot. Made up of, in the coalition is the National Institute of Reproductive Health, the New York Civil Liberties Union, the NAACP, as well as many other organizations who all came together to really stop, the idea is to really stop fighting all of our own battles separately. And what if we stopped doing this all in our own corners and came together and realized that so many of our rights are up for debate and to be on the chopping block, and what if we all move together at once? And so this is kind of how this came together. And so we are here, we're just about a month to election day, a little less at this point, to get proposal 1 passed. And so before I go into this reproductive health care related, pregnancy related protections, I want to make clear that race and religion are in the current state constitution, but they're not really protected in terms of state. I'll back up. Proposal 1 really is about closing gaps, first and foremost. We have a lot of gaps and vulnerabilities in our law. And so on the basis of race and religion, it is in there. It was put in there in 1938, but unsurprisingly, there's no real way to sue most of the time if somebody is discriminated on the basis of race and religion using the New York State Constitution. Above all, it is mostly symbolic to make us feel good that these are values. But on the basis of race and religion, those are mostly symbolic protections. There's no clear path most of the time to sue in state court. Proposal 1 closes this gap along with many others, but it begins by closing this gap so that some of our government institutions that have sometimes been discriminatory and are hard to hold accountable. This includes law enforcement, prisons and jails, public benefits agencies, that they are actually able to vindicate their rights in court if they face discrimination. And so that I wanted to clarify in race and religion that it's not as protective as it's often thought, and that just because it's in there doesn't mean you can use it. It actually has to have teeth to it. And so proposal 1 gives that protection teeth. And so I'll move into sexual and reproductive health care. And I just want to make clear where we are across the country. Since the overturn of Roe v. Wade, we have about 22 states that have enacted a severe abortion ban. That number actually could be different. I do this for a living, and it's really hard to keep up because there is constantly a court case, constantly a new state law that's being brought forth, and the number changes really by the week. And so about 22 states. While we're fortunate in New York State in many ways to have the Reproductive Health Act, this changing landscape has actually impacted care here in New York State because it's created a lot of confusion, it's created a lot of misinformation, and a lot of people here in New York State don't know what their rights are. And so we've had Planned Parenthood Hudson Chronic patients come in and look at our physicians and say, is this even legal? And when you don't know what your rights are and when it's not clear, when it is confusing, it makes it much, much more difficult to exercise those rights. And so that in itself creates a difficulty for access. And so this changing landscape, all this confusion, all this upheaval is having an impact even in abortion access states. And so I want to make that clear that what Proposal 1 helps offer is to make it even clearer in New York State that this is a fundamental right, that abortion is protected in our state constitution, along with so many other protections, but it puts abortion in the framework as a fundamental right that everyone has. And so I wanted to offer some example protections related to reproductive health care that Proposal 1 will provide. It would prevent the state government from implementing a state abortion ban, like those 22 states have done. It would stop the state government or prevent it from ending state funding for abortion via Medicaid. I want to make clear how important Medicaid is to reproductive health care access. 72% of Planned Parenthood Hudson Paconic's patients last year relied on Medicaid for services. 72%. We saw tens of thousands of patients across 4 counties. Only in 4 counties in New York State. And so it's really vital for access to basic care. Almost half of all births in New York were covered by Medicaid. That's incredible, almost half of all births. And so we know this would be a top tactic if anti-abortion politicians were to win in New York State at the state level. And so this proposal would help prevent that and protect care for so many. It would prevent the state from banning private insurance coverage of abortion. It would prevent the prosecution and criminalization of miscarriage and neonatal loss. And it would prevent the state from adding medically unnecessary burdens on patients or facilities. And so that's something that's been across the country really, really popular. I am not from New York State originally. I have lived in North Carolina and Virginia, and in both of those states, it has been that's the status quo, is adding all of these things, waiting periods, forcing people to look at ultrasounds. And so that has been the norm. As great as Roe v. Wade was, that was still a gap in the law that it allowed for that to happen. And we know in states that currently have abortion access, if somebody else comes to power, they're going to try and do everything they can to throw a wrench into basic access to care. And those medically unnecessary burdens are a main way that they do that. And so I want to focus a little bit on pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes. This isn't something we talk about a lot, so I'm just going to define what pregnancy discrimination is, which is the negative and different treatment of somebody because they are pregnant. And pregnancy discrimination doesn't constitute sex discrimination in our current federal constitution or in the state constitution. The Supreme Court ruled in 1974 that it doesn't constitute sex discrimination. Over 50 years later, or actually almost over, we are still at that point. That's still their interpretation. And so this closes that gap. Usually we think that it does protect us or protect based on pregnancy discrimination because of the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, but that only covers matters of employment. But all those other ways that somebody who's pregnant is vulnerable doesn't cover those. And I also want to take a moment to define pregnancy outcome discrimination. Pregnancy outcome discrimination is negative and different treatment for how a pregnancy ends. And so pregnancies can end in a variety of ways. A baby can be born perfectly healthy. Stillbirths can result, miscarriages, neonatal death, abortion. And so there's a variety of ways that a pregnancy can end. And one thing we don't talk about enough is that pregnancy outcome discrimination is real and it is growing. Pregnant people across the country have faced criminal and civil consequences for their pregnancy outcome, for how those pregnancies end. I'm just going to give a couple of statistics to show what I mean by this. And so in the 32-year period between 1973 and 2005, there were 413 cases where a woman's pregnancy outcome or pregnancy was the main factor in her incarceration. That was the reason. In the about 15-ish year period between 2006 and 2021, half the amount of time, that number tripled to over 1,200. That was before Roe v. Wade was overturned. And so now that Roe v. Wade is gone, we're seeing headlines all over the place where this is really growing quite a bit. And I'll also note that 52% of those cases were Black women, 71% were low-income women. And so this really shows how pregnancy and pregnancy outcome discrimination compounds with other forms of discrimination. It leaves vulnerable people even more vulnerable. And so I'll share some of these headlines because it's a little bit difficult, I'm told, by people who have never heard of pregnancy outcome discrimination to understand really what I mean. And so what I did before Roe v. Wade was overturned, when we were trying to get Proposal 1 passed in the legislatures, I did all this research. I gathered all these headlines. It wasn't very difficult to do. You just do a quick Google News search about what was happening and how it was being reported. And so this is before Roe v. Wade was overturned. And none of these, by the way, have to do with actual abortion. So it says, one is, this woman delivered a stillborn baby. Now she's in jail and accused of murder. Manslaughter conviction of 21-year-old Oklahoma woman who suffered miscarriage sparks outcry. Eating poppy seed cake got this pregnant woman reported to child services. US women are being jailed for having miscarriages. Ending Roe could send more women to prison for miscarrying. And this one's really something. Alabama woman shot while pregnant, charged with death of fetus. And so that one was a case of a woman in Alabama. She got into an argument. The person she was arguing with took out a gun and shot her. She suffered pregnancy loss as a result. And then that pregnant woman who didn't partake in any of that violence was the one who was charged with her own pregnancy loss for manslaughter. And so we're seeing a proliferation of more of these cases across the country, but it's not just across the country, actually. Sometimes in my work, there's the recognition that we are lucky to be in New York State in many ways. There are more protections, but we still have gaps in the law. We still have work to do, which Proposal 1 helps us do. But this has happened here. And so I want to give a more local example that happened on Long Island. And so Jennifer Jorgensen was a woman, she was pregnant. In 2008, she got in her car. She had a car crash. It was really a very serious medical issue. She was rushed to the hospital. She had to have an emergency delivery. And 6 days later, her baby died. So she was then charged with manslaughter for the death of her baby for that car crash. They were saying that she was responsible because she was driving. And this was on Long Island in PPHP's territory. And so it took 7 years to get those charges tossed out by the judge, a state judge in New York. 7 whole years. That is plenty of time to ruin somebody's life. Because it's not just the fact that if you're found guilty, the entire process of having to hire lawyers and be dragged to court and potentially lose your job, and just the emotional stress of that, trauma related to that is plenty. 7 years is plenty of time to have somebody's life ruined. And so while the state judge really did make the right call in tossing out all the charges, he ruled pretty narrowly in that case. And so he left it wide open. He didn't determine whether similar charges could be brought against somebody again. This was only in Jennifer Jorgensen's case. This was not in somebody else. This could happen to somebody else. And so again, proposal 1 is about closing gaps for all these vulnerable people that the law has left. There's wide open gaps in it. So I want to recap real quick that right now we do have that great, very nice sounding civil rights clause in our Constitution that covers race and religion. It is extremely hard and very rare that anybody can use that to vindicate their rights in court, in state court. And with proposal 1, we not only close that gap with race and religion, we add ethnicity, national origin, age, disability, sex. And sex includes sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, pregnancy outcomes, and reproductive health care and autonomy. And so this is really closes all those gaps, which is really what this law is designed to do. And I wanted to also note that some of the things that we'll be doing, like I mentioned, we don't have very much time until election day, but we need your help in telling people to flip their ballots over. When you go vote, you're not likely to be told, make sure you flip your ballot over. They're gonna hand you a ballot and go, here you go, and hope that you will remember. On the front, it's gonna be all candidates, the names of people. On the back, it is ballot proposals. And there's only one at the state level, but across the state, there are various different local and county things going on. So you might see other ones, but ballot proposal 1 right there. And so some of the things we have going on, we have right here in White Plains, PPHP is doing 4 phone banks planned. And I'll leave some information so we can hopefully get that posted for people who want to attend. There are online phone banks as well. There are canvases at farmers markets across Westchester that some of our partners are doing. And so I'm really encouraging people to come out, please, in these last 30-ish days, and help inform everybody that this is happening and all of these important things, particularly to protect pregnant people across our state. So.
Exactly what I was going to say. We are now open for questions. I'll pass this mic around, okay? And you can direct your question to whomever. Oh. There is going to be an event on October 26th. And it's going to be downtown White Plains. I know it's the same day as our climate justice rally, but it's, yes, it's in the afternoon from 2 o'clock down in front of the McCallion office building. So several of us are going, and I think Reverend Daniel is excited to be tabling at the event. So we will have materials on this. The event is Rally for Reproductive Rights. Okay, I haven't advertised it yet because I wanted all the focus to be on today. So, okay, but we will, yes. Okay.
You know, I'm a nurse practitioner and I worked for Planned Parenthood Westchester for 17 years. And I was in charge of abortion service. And I remember when we had the gag rule. And I still don't understand what happened, but we could not talk about options and get Medicaid. So that happened, is what I'm saying. And then also another thing that happened, and I just want to say how incredibly it was, we had protesters banging on our door. And then they changed the law. They had to stand away. And let me tell you, I cried. It was really terrifying to see hundreds of people banging on your doors while you're trying to do an abortion service. So I just wanted to bring that up. Yeah.
And I just add something I just remembered when Tyler was speaking. In 1980, when I was in private practice, one of my first cases was against a federal judge's law secretary for firing someone because they got pregnant. And he said, this was a long time ago, that basically, I don't really want people who have kids because whatever the old assumption was, you weren't going to come to work. I lost that case because federal judge employees were protected under federal law from employment discrimination. That's the kind of challenge we have that Tyler's talking about. You know, this still is real 40 years later, and we can't afford to lose any of those cases. We have to make sure that this pregnancy outcome, being pregnant, is not discriminatory. The other thing I want to mention is the impact on LGBTQ people, that this expressly protects them, for example, from losing custody of a child because you're LGBTQ. Some of the things that have happened over time. Our downstate judges, we've done fairly well in some of this, but it's not across the board. This will be a constitutional protection for critical rights of that community.
I'll also add too that even today, those protesters are still outside our health centers. Fortunately, they don't sit there and bang on the door. But they're there, and we have spent an enormous sum of money reconfiguring some of our health centers, the entire building. We had to completely swap it all around, deconstruct the inside so that people wouldn't get harassed trying to get healthcare. And so, yeah, it's still really important to keep that in mind, even here in Westchester and White Plains.
In White Plains, I remember that. Well,
Thank you. Thanks. Hi, Shelley. How are you? So this is not about a pregnancy outcome, but something that I read about that had been happening, not in New York State, but elsewhere, that pregnant women, most of them were Black, this was happening in like South Carolina, I think, would go to the hospital to get, I guess, prenatal health care. And without knowing it, they were drug tested, and some tested positive and were arrested. So would this protect against that also? If it ever started happening in New York State, God forbid?
I'm not sure, I'm not an attorney, but there certainly gives it more of a case.
I think that would be explicitly against the Constitution, only because she was pregnant.
Right.
Like I go in for broken arm, I'm not drug tested, but because I'm pregnant and therefore that's the sole reason why I'm drug tested, I think there's a very compelling argument that would be unconstitutional.
That's good to
And
hear.
also the state's compelling interest in the health of the fetus, at least under the Roe structure that we're trying to sort of recreate under New York law, occurs when post viability. So at an early stage, I don't think there's any state interest that could be even articulated for why someone should be subject to it. And I'm not aware of that happening here. The other thing is under New York law and under federal law, when someone comes into the hospital, and we've seen this violated in these other states, there is a requirement to treat someone for that emergency. But these other states where people are being afraid of being prosecuted, doctors and other medical staff, they're declining to do so, which is just so incomprehensible. But in New York, there is a requirement to treat people.
Just a question about the proposition itself, and thanks so much for educating us all on the process. Since we've reached this point where the proposition will be on the ballot, 2 questions. Is it a simple majority that's needed to pass it? And number 2, is this the final hurdle that disposes?
Yes, both of them, yes, just a simple majority, and if it passes by a majority, Constitution is amended.
I'd like to ask about, my name is Joanne Prince Valley. I'd like to ask about the fact that even though the constitutional amendment hopefully gets passed. It's not a complete panacea. It's something that, if, let's say, a county legislature, like what Nassau recently did with, sports fields, in violation of an existing law, it still has to be challenged in court if there's a violation. So it's not necessarily automatically everyone's going to be okay, but it's a good thing to have, I think. And I'd like to confirm that.
Thank you, Joanne. I didn't recognize you there. Super leader on these issues, many years.
Hi, I'm Sumac Ananima. I was in Newburgh for a funeral last week, and right in the church, Catholic church, actually it was an Episcopal church, it's a Catholic family, vote no on Proposition 1, and I took a picture, there were two of them throughout the church. And so this is the fierce, formidable opposing views, and I don't know what we're doing about that. I'm glad to see this in this church, but this is going to sink the bill if we can't mobilize Catholics and Protestant people to support this, especially women. But if they see this in their church, they're going to just say, "Oh, I'm supposed to vote no."
Well, I'm worried about it. Yeah, I represent a significantly Catholic community and always have. We've had this on other issues where the priest puts that in there and there's a significant number of people who are influenced by it. We really have a challenge, and that's why this grassroots activism, particularly getting to women, is so critical. I would say that last week or this week for Rosh Hashanah services at my temple, they gave out postcards because they have endorsed this campaign. So that's why getting the word out one by one is so critical. But you're right, we're
Spending money on it? Is it?
Yes, we're-
Is the party spending money?
Yeah, we knew from the beginning there were going to be quite a few people who did not like this. When you put abortion protections in the state constitution and say you want to protect all these groups, I mean, like I said, even going to work, I passed protesters. This was expected from the beginning. We have limited control over the opposition. What we do have control over is who we communicate with, how we communicate with them, and how involved we get. That's what we have control over. So we're not going to stop the opposition. They have a First Amendment right to speak their mind, just like everybody else here. But everybody else here also has that right. And so we all need to use it and to show up. These last 30-ish days are really critical. And so I would encourage everybody to get involved, to spread the word, and to fight misinformation. The best way to fight misinformation is just to go with the correct information and get it to people. Yes, I'm talking. Oh, the New Yorkers for Equal Rights. Yes, you can go to New Yorkers for Equal Rights. Is that?
They have some literature on.
Right, and I also brought some.
a broad bipartisan coalition, New Yorkers for Equal Rights, that is intended to get past partisanship. So it's not all, we can't have just Democrats voting for this. We need everybody to vote for this. And so I would say some candidates, like my opponent, are making the whole campaign about this issue. But I think there is a broad nonpartisan coalition that can engage in party politics. But there has been a commitment of money from a lot of the stakeholders in this to do this work. It could we need more.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have two questions. I think you just answered the first one. Will your name be on the ballot this year?
Well, we're not supposed to discuss that.
Okay,
Sorry.
and when we ask people to flip the ballot over, you said that there's a county proposal.
Yes.
Should we be recommending voting yes on both of those? What
I'll
is
just
that
explain
proposal?
what it is. Is that all right? Very briefly?
Just found out about it yesterday.
Okay, it changes the term, not term limits, of county legislators from 2 to 4 years. It's been unanimously endorsed by the Democrats, Republicans, and conservative. There's one Republican, one conservative on the county board. All of them have voted for this. You know, it's really enough time. It would bring them in sync to most county legislatures, and it would give them enough time that they're not running 1 year, working the next year, you know, that kind of thing, which occurs in the state legislature, and I think is unfortunate. So that is the second county proposition that's after this first proposition on the back of the ballot.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I have a question. In the history of elections, proposals are given almost no publicity. And I'd like to know why a proposal that is effected by the state legislature, why the state legislature cannot send a mailing to every voter, informing people what the proposal is and make sure you turn over your ballot.
We can inform on our government capacity, we can inform, but not suggest what people do. And I think in my newsletter, I have informed people and will continue to do so, to do a mailing about it and to make sure people know that it's there. I think you're right. That is not a statewide policy. It's up to each legislator. Yeah.
Could you please share what has been the most successful way to address someone with whom you haven't discussed this before? Sort of a good way to get into it and how to sort of listen and in a productive way and inform at the same time?
Sure. Well, whenever you know the people you're talking to, right? You know them to some degree, what you might expect from them. And so how we generally try to recommend people having difficult conversations about some topics is start with your shared values, find a common ground, and then explain in a very honest way why this is important to you. And really, you gotta drilling into people with what you believe. It's similar to the idea of the people who try to shame people or drill into them the importance of something like voting or importance of any other issue. Lecturing somebody is never going to be effective. People just shut down. And so try to find common ground and a shared value. And that's really what you're going to build that conversation with.
Yeah. I think, and forgive me for being personal, but my daughter had a second term abortion because of fetal abnormalities. In Connecticut, where it's allowed, as it would be in New York under current law. However, with a different legislature, they could cut off the time that you could have a legal abortion to this 6-week that they've adopted in some states, or 10 weeks. These second trimester abortions, as rare as they are and as terrible as they are. So I think when you're talking to women, regardless of party affiliation, many of them have their own story. IVF story, their grandchildren were conceived through IVF. The personal stories of people through pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes are so, I think, a connector for many women. And I think that it's fair to say you want to live in a place where, you know, your daughter can have such a thing if there is a fetal abnormality that is going to prevent the life of that fetus. So that wouldn't be true in some other states. And God bless that she lives in Connecticut and we live in New York. But this really does enshrine into law. And I used to say this when we counter-protested at Planned Parenthood many years ago, and some of you may have done that. You met all these women who went to church and said they were against abortion, but their granddaughter got pregnant at 18. And they were there at Planned Parenthood with them. They did not want their granddaughter to have a baby. They knew what their life would change. So I personally, as someone who talks to people who disagree with me about many things, including this, I think there is a personal connection for women particularly. Maybe some men too, but you know, God bless the men who are with us.
I'll also add too, that this is so broad, it does so many things, that somebody might not be receptive to one part of it, but they're likely receptive to something in it. That's one of the advantages of having something that's so protective across so many different people and gives them something else to consider. And so, yeah, so pregnancy outcomes, for example, somebody is uncomfortable with one part, but well, did you know this? And so if you know that they are receptive to protecting pregnant people, ensuring our pregnancy, basic pregnancy discrimination, they might just be receptive to that part, and it gives them something to think about. We have a number. Awesome. We have a number of flyers. If you'd like to get involved, we have QR codes and a little bit of other information. And I'll leave some board.
The screen.
Awesome.
There's, the old teacher comes back. So we do have a table back there by the screen, and it has a lot of information on it, including information from the New Yorkers for Reproductive Freedom. And on the last thing on the back of this, I only printed the first 2 pages. It talks about what to say to somebody if you're not certain what to say. But despite what it says here, I agree with Shelley. Tell a personal story or retell her story. That's powerful and it's true. And that can make a difference. All right, and so you're gonna leave the other flyers there. Oh, yeah, absolutely. We have a bulletin board. All right. Thank you. I can't believe this. We got such a nice outcome. If you haven't signed the clipboard, because we'd like to invite you to possible other future events, we have several clipboards around. And I want to thank not only the reproductive justice team, but in particular, Audra Russell, who did an incredible amount of work. I'd also like to thank Kathleen Kearney, who just left with her daughter. She managed to get the word out with publicity. And I'd like to thank some personal friends who just sent it to their friends, or some Jewish organizations published it on their Facebook pages or in their newsletter. So, we did a lot of networking to try to get people out to this. And thank you all for coming. And I'm probably forgetting the tech crew. Without Anthony and Terry, this wouldn't have been possible. I think Anthony left the room. So Audrey, there he is. Okay, good. Right. And I'd like to thank Reverend Danielle for her rousing speech at the end of her sermon to try to get people interested in attending this and voting yes for Proposition 1 and flipping the ballot. Okay.